Welcome, everybody, to today's Acronis webinar, Maximizing Computer Uptime in Operational Technology and Industrial Control Systems Environments. I'm your host, James Slaby. I'm the Director of Cyber Protection at Acronis. Go to LinkedIn if you want to learn more about my background. Today's event is being recorded, and we'll send you a link via email for a recording that you can share with colleagues who couldn't attend today, or if there's bits of today's event that you wanted to review. Attendee microphones will be muted throughout the event, but we are interested in your feedback and particularly your questions, because we're doing a live Q&A with our distinguished panel of speakers a little bit later in the event today. So just submit those through the Zoom Q&A interface throughout the event. I'm going to do a quick review of today's agenda. Our first speaker is Thomas Fertal of pharmaceutical giant Merck. He's going to give his perspective on best practices in maintaining uptime for OT and ICS environments. Next up, our next guest speaker is Shannon McKay from automation giant Rockwell Automation. He's going to talk about current trends in OT security management. I'll invite Tom back to the stage, and then we'll add my colleague, Ryan Davis, who is an Acronis expert in enterprise environments, particularly manufacturing. And he's going to join Shannon and Tom in a panel discussion that I'm going to lead on today's topic. After the panel discussion, we're going to have a very quick look at the Acronis solution that our partners in customers in manufacturing use to address some of the issues that we're raising today. That's going to be a very short look at Acronis Cyber Protect. That's our platform for that, led by my colleague, Solutions Architect JD Perham. Then we'll get the panel back on stage again to take your questions. And then I'll wrap up very briefly by pointing you some additional resources. All right, so let's jump right into the main event here. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Tom Fertal, the Associate Director at Merck. Tom owns the business continuity and disaster recovery functions for Merck's manufacturing division. In his 4 years at Merck, Tom transformed Merck's backup and recovery capabilities and managed the division's technology risk and compliance practices. Before he joined Merck, Tom worked at Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, AIP, focused on implementing technology for high risk reduction. Welcome, Tom. Very excited to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, James. Folks, so I'm gonna talk to you about best practices for backup and recovery of OT, right? So some assumptions for the audience. You may be involved in manufacturing where there's the use of operational technology. Part of your control suite around that operational technology may include things like air gapping or network segmentation. So there may be a suite of controls that are already in place. The different areas may locally manage some of that operational technology. You may have different manufacturing sites, which could actually create a more intricate support model around that. With respect to some of the recovery requirements of these systems, some of them actually could be quite stringent. So recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives. Another assumption is that you have some kind of ITSM process or CMDB process already in place. For example, ServiceNow. So you've already got that practice in place. And another assumption, I think this is true for most of us, there's always pressure to lower business as usual type maintenance costs, right? So these are just some of the assumptions that we may have in common around this topic. All right, so just moving on. In terms of backup and recovery, so one thing to keep in mind with respect to OT is that there may be some with respect to OPC or Open Platform Communications Protocol, a lot of the devices may actually utilize that protocol. So you have to think about a backup and recovery utility that actually works well with OPC. So another point too is that when you actually collect the backup, when the snapshot is collected, Sometimes there's a database stun or a network stun that may be seen. So you want to utilize techniques and also a utility that might avoid that database stun. Another helpful practice is that where you have the backup agent, you want to utilize something that actually pulls the configuration settings from the console instead of the console actually pushing it. So there's different technologies in place where you have that network segmentation, you have to keep things secure, where the agent actually does that pull. That's actually another consideration for your backup capability. The Purdue model. So a lot of us, would actually have our network segmentation actually set up according to the Purdue model. So you may want to think about a utility that's actually Purdue model aware. Another thing is with respect to initiating a recovery. So a lot of the capabilities, you could actually start the utility from the console, but what's helpful, again, considering that you've got the network segmentation, we've got the local management. If there's a local recovery management feature where the recovery can actually be initiated from the endpoint, that's another consideration to keep in mind. Now, it's possible to install consoles in all the different network segments. However, if you have a capability that has a cloud aware architecture, something that you can run in AWS, you might be able to set up a regional capability as well, and that's actually listed down below. Sometimes when the backup utility is set up, there's kind of an express install, but you may have requirements for a higher capacity. You may have to manage a higher number of devices. So if you have that higher capacity configuration option, that's another thing to keep in mind. You also, along those lines, you also want to think about from an enterprise perspective. If you could actually, with one quote unquote platform, if you could take care of the entire enterprise, it's maybe not an initial step that you'll take, but it's something that you're going to want to have down the road as you may add a division on to the capability, et cetera, right? And then finally, do you have a backup utility that's actually storage aware? So there may be different storage capabilities. You want the flexibility to actually utilize a system that actually works with the storage that your firm is already using, right? So along the lines of storage, you want to have something that actually works with your pre-existing infrastructure. You don't want to have to run new storage, in some cases specific just to the backup process. You want to be able to work with your backup team on that. Of course, you want to have the 3-2-1 backup rule. So you want to have the ability to replicate. You want to have some of that already in place. If you have that regional storage capability, then that's less infrastructure that you have to actually acquire just for your backup solution. You want to think about operational recovery versus disaster recovery versus cyber recovery, right? So you may have a phased approach according to that. In terms of operational recovery, can you actually recover one server, whether the data be corrupted or whether there be an outage? It's very different than if you have a wide-scale ransomware attack, right? So the recovery techniques are going to be very different. You might want to have a phased approach, but you're going to want to think about those three scenarios as you actually set this up. Of course, you're going to want to have encryption in transit and at rest. And then this is another one that may not be so apparent up front, but the notion of immutability, a term that I'm maybe this is going back quite a number of years, but the notion of write once, read many. So immutability, sometimes it's referred to as retention lock, but a lot of the cyber attacks actually go to attack actually the actual backup archives. So if you have immutability at the storage level, that actually protects the archives. In the event that there is an attack, you'll be able to recover. So that's an important thing that's sometimes overlooked, but it's very important. You want to have expandable storage. So as your service may grow, you want to be able to expand that and address other similar devices as need be. Another option that you might want to think about is the difference between physical storage versus virtual storage. So there may be a location where you may just have a couple devices that you need to protect. Is it worth the cost of a full set of hardware just for that one small location? So if there's a virtual capability where you could actually run it on a larger host, that actually provides a lot of flexibility, and that addresses some of the ongoing costs and cost reduction around that. And of course, it might not always be required, but if you have a high availability option, and that can be utilized selectively, where you have more business critical capabilities in one location versus not. But if you have that option, that's going to be potentially important as well. From an operational perspective, so we mentioned ITSM up front. For your backup failure monitoring, you might want to think about using incident management as part of your backup failure monitoring. It's a way to integrate with your ITSM solution, that's IT service management, and actually integrate it with your incident management process. That's a way to actually streamline your operations. Of course, the assumption is that you have some of that discipline up front, so that may be some overhead that you have to kind of address, but it's one thing to think about. You may not have to do it up front, but it would be a way to actually streamline the operations going forward. Your management reporting. So you have to have the ability to oversee your solution and the service. You have to have the ability to demonstrate compliance. So if you have that data-driven management reporting, it's important even from day one. And then another thing to think about in terms of your operations. So every organization will have different sets of people that do different things. One thing to think about is, how do you separate your root level super admin folks from your local level admin folks? All right. So for example, if you want to create a set of backup protection plans, you might want to have them utilized consistently throughout a number of systems or a number of sites. You might want to have that run by the root level admin and then make sure it's consumed at the lower levels, right? So just think about your separation of duties from upfront as well. So folks, these are some of the best practices that you can think about for your backup and recovery capability for IT systems in particular. James, I think I'm throwing it back over to you, right?
Thanks for that, Tom. That was really fantastic. Don't go too far, because I'm going to need you again in a few minutes for the panel. But now it's time for me to introduce our next similarly extravagantly talented and experienced speaker. Shannon McKay is the Senior Director for Lifecycle Services at Rockwell Automation. He's got over 30 years of experience in the automation industry, including 27 years at Rockwell in various steadily expanding leadership roles. Most recently led the North American Services Organization and managed both the services and solutions delivery teams for North America. Shannon's current role is Business Unit Integration Leader for Rockwell's acquisition of Verve Industrial Solutions. Shannon, the stage is yours.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Hopefully my camera gets a little better. It looks like it's better now. It might have some issues with some fuzziness, but As James mentioned, I'm functioning as the general manager for Verve. It's an acquisition that Rockwell did back in November of 2023. And Verve is a OT cybersecurity software platform, service enabled, that allows customers to companies to do deep asset inventory and vulnerability management across their manufacturing floor. Next slide, please. So we've been seeing this trend for quite some time, and really what we're trying to show here is that manufacturing, which is the space that Rockwell Automation plays in exclusively, right? So we're talking about OT-based cybersecurity, not the IT side of things. Organizations in the manufacturing space generally look at three different sort of ways to solve the cybersecurity challenge within the OT space. You can do things locally, which is sort of at the plant level or a site level, where local teams, instrumentation and control technicians or engineering teams, plant management and engineering are responsible for aggregating site level assessments and network information. They're responsible for just managing patch management, configuration management, et cetera. And you can see the rest of the things that we can do locally at a plant level. Another option is to look at the OT security requirements or responsibilities as an IT task, right? As a global corporate centralized IT function. And many customers do that as well. Of course, aggregate manually collected data into the CMDB, conduct manual vulnerability scans, backups of virtualized infrastructure, et cetera. You can see the different kinds of things that we can do from a centralized approach. What we'd like to do with our Verve acquisition and with Rockwell and our customers together is to think global and act local, which what we mean by that is really a combination of those two different sort of frameworks to allow automated real-time assessment information aggregated into a central enterprise view. So think about a global enterprise-wide dashboard, excuse me, for your OT cyber state posture and position and current status. You can centralize teams to analyze risks and prioritize remediation, not just within a site level, but by site, and do other things from kind of a more globally distributed framework. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'll touch a little bit more on what we view as the pros and cons of these different potential ways to deploy OT practice. There we go. Yep, got it. So if you think about this local at a plant level and managing the OT security requirements locally, it's safe for OT, meaning that organization generally knows exactly what it takes to keep the manufacturing environment running and safe production and uptime and things of that nature. Provides a lot of local knowledge and local responsiveness. The flip side is it can be very high in terms of costs overall, labor intensive, high training costs, no real centralized visibility, and data can get out of date really quickly. So that's one of the cons of the localized approach. From a global perspective, when you've got a centralized IT or even a centralized IT OT team, greater access to resources, you can integrate across the two different domains. You can scale the limited resources and tools across OT and IT together. That's a real positive. The cons to that side of it, or the minuses, sometimes you could put risk into the OT operational environment, right? If we're not real cautious with respect to what's going on locally, and you can have delayed and some latency in the views of certain assets and data. This think global, act local capability that we speak to with respect to Verve really kind of marries up both of the best of both worlds, I'll call it, right? Where you've got the efficiencies around centralized analysis and the different tool sets and resourcing with the localized knowledge and the ability to kind of manage at the local level. The only real con, or one of the cons I'll say to that approach, is that you do have slightly different tools in the OT space versus IT. It's not to say that there aren't IT providers today who are playing in the OT space, but for sure, purpose-built OT tools are a growing area. That's where Verve plays. Go ahead to the next slide, please, Misha, or James. So when we think about this, think global, act local, Verve is a software platform, as I mentioned, and we look at all the way from the plant floor level, where we've got agentless communications and native drivers to OT devices. So in the manufacturing environment, you've got things like PLCs down at the base level, DCS systems, you have variable frequency drives, you have HMI panels, so all the stuff you see on a manufacturing floor. And that kind of middle level, you've got basically what we call VAM, which is the Verve Asset Managers, that takes all this data, collects it, aggregates it, and then serves it up to an enterprise-wide reporting and analysis dashboard. And so the reason I show this framework is it shows you a very flexible scalable architecture, at least in terms of deploying a cybersecurity solution across your OT environment. And it can flex from any combination of kind of what you're looking at here in terms of the customer's needs. It also allows for very rapid scaling from one site across an enterprise. Next slide, please. And then when you think about the different areas here in terms of the local plant, we talked about the resourcing on the right side here. At the local level, you've got plant IT, you've got engineering, quality, et cetera. At the top level, where you've got the global centralization, you've got the activity around prioritization, best practices, policies, controls, pushing playbooks. In between is a capability around subject matter expertise. And when we get to the questions later in the panel, we'll probably speak to this a little bit. But regional or subject matter experts, SMEs, around networking, compensating controls, specific remediation advice. These are all key elements to build out a very scalable enterprise-wide OT cybersecurity platform and program. I won't speak to all the bullets on the left in the interest of time, but I think we kind of touched on most of those. If you want to go to the last slide here, James. I know Tom mentioned ITSM or IT Systems Management. We look at it from the Rockwell Automation and Verve perspective as a combination of OT and IT, enterprise systems or security management, right? So we use the terminology Verve, the Verve platform, and our capabilities to deliver Verve is really an OTSM. So if you look at that centralized gear in the middle, asset inventory, which is essentially discovering every asset you have within a facility, all the way out to every single endpoint, is a critical first step in establishing a cybersecurity program. And Verve does that extremely well, right? And then if you look around the outside of that, vulnerability management, patch management, configuration, user, and account, the Verve platform does all of that from an OT perspective. And then Rockwell partners with other key technology partners around things like incident response or intrusion detection. So that whole central wheel or gear is the OT piece of it. And then, of course, around the outside, you see a traditional, maybe a bit more typical or traditional ITSM landscape, right? Including things like Acronis for backup and restore, right? And we partner with Acronis across delivering different solution sets as well. But this is just intended to show that Verve allows for a very scalable solution architecture flexibly, and it really fits well within a typical IT environment. The other thing I will leave you with, many of you are in the IT space. We work with OT manufacturing side. It's critical that our customers together work between OT and IT because it's inevitable, number one, but it's to really drive a true partnership across a common enterprise. The OT organization, the IT organization work very, very close together in collaboration. And then Rockwell comes in and helps support their programmatic needs. With that, apologize, I went a bit fast, but I'm going to turn it back over to you, James.
Thank you for that, Shannon. That was great, even if a accelerated clip there. Appreciate that. Don't go away. I need you for our panel discussion now. Tom, if you could come back on stage. I want to welcome you back for the panel discussion. And it's also time for me to introduce our third panelist, my colleague Ryan Davis, who leads the commercial enterprise team at Acronis. Ryan's got over 10 years of experience in storage and data management. He leads a global team at Acronis that helps our enterprise customers and partners improve business continuity and security in historically difficult environments like edge computing, endpoint protection, as we're talking a lot about today, industrial automation and R&D labs. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, James. Happy to be here.
Good. We got everybody here. So let's jump right into the discussion here. I always talk about the kind of challenges around uptime along 3 dimensions, process, technology, and people challenges. Why don't we start off with your experiences in developing, modifying, keeping up to date the processes that are essential to maintaining uptime in OT environments. Feel free, anybody, to jump in here and start.
Sure. Maybe I'll kick us off, and then Tom, Shannon, you guys could just dovetail. And I thought it was really interesting. Both of your presentations touched on a concept that was similar. And from a process perspective, I think establishing the framework for how these environments will be managed from a technical perspective is probably the top challenge. So Shannon called it, think global, act local. Is this, a manufacturing where they manage it locally at the business level? Is this a global IT, central IT problem that they have to manage? And I think both of you in different ways identified that the best approach is kind of hybrid. Shannon with the think global, act local, Tom talking about, regional controls, trying to centralize and streamline your infrastructure, but still providing local recovery capabilities, local administrative capabilities for the business to be able to interact and leverage the tool. So from a process perspective, I think establishing that framework, getting agreements and buy-in from all of the stakeholders to have that optimal framework should be the top priority, and is also the top challenge, because it's a change from the way most organizations have historically managed these environments, and change is hard.
Yeah, Ryan, if I can just add to that, I think we have a lot of security-minded folks on the call with us, right? So we all know the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So for OT, flip that on its head. Put the A for availability at the top. That's the challenge from a process perspective, because we're kind of constrained. We talk about all the other controls around us, like the air gapping, the network segmentation. It creates a lot of difficulty when it comes to availability. So working within those constraints, how can you actually make sure that you have a resilient approach, that you have all the necessary services available, right? Being able to balance that. So that's kind of the key process difficulty from a framework perspective.
I might add, yes, thank you, Tom. And I agree, by the way. So I'll just stay purely in the manufacturing space. When you talk about production just uptime, and then as it relates to cybersecurity as well. If you think about what's transpired in manufacturing in the last 15, 20 years, is this massive amplification of data availability and connectivity on a plant floor, right? And of course, manufacturing is historically well behind the consumer space. But today, if you go into a manufacturing plant in North America, for example, you're going to see vintage control systems that are 25 and 30 years old. But we've connected those vintage control systems by bolting on an Ethernet card or what have you. And so we've connected all these legacy devices in the interest of getting data to keep production uptime for all kinds of reasons, right? And so up until cybersecurity really became front and center, probably 10 years ago, at least in the OT space-ish, it was all about just expanding data availability, right? So now we've got this massive amplification of connected devices in manufacturing plants that are extremely old, extremely exposed and vulnerable. And now we want to put a wrapper around and secure it all, right? And so and keep production running. So I go back to your first comment, Ryan, which is you need a plan, a framework, a strategy. At least in the manufacturing space, it's not about just throwing tools at it or software packages, right? And so when we go in and talk to our customers, like I mentioned, Verve is a solution set. Acronis is a part of the solution. It's not about what tool is going to solve all your problems. It's about what's your plan. And it's usually multi-phase, multi-year with commitments and investments. So long answer, but it's a compelling, like all the advantage of the data, the availability, and what we want to look at for analytics. The flip side being now you got to secure it all.
All right, that's a really great coverage, I think, of that process question. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, since we talked a little bit about technology, but I really want to get to the question of people skills. What kind of challenges you have faced, and what kind of strategies you've implemented to address, providing people at the plant level with the skills that they need to support your uptime goals.
Yeah.
Anybody jump in?
Go ahead, Tom, please.
Thanks, Shannon. So again, there's that central enterprise approach. We want to have an enterprise approach, but we got to have the kind of a lot more of a self-service approach when it comes to all the underlying processes. For example, Acronis backup and recovery. So that's front and center kind of on our discussion here. Can the site be able to actually initiate a recovery without sending in a ticket request to a central group, waiting, maybe getting, an unexpected result? So is it possible to actually have more self-service? And the challenge with that is it's going to require more skill at the local level. So you're going to have to practice more. That comes down to, I think Shannon and Ryan were referring to the plan, right? Having a good plan, having that practice in place, not necessarily compliance-oriented testing, recovery tests, et cetera, but actually just upskilling and making sure people are actually familiar with the tools and techniques that have to be used.
Yeah,
Yep,
and to go on to that, and sorry, Shannon, I'll be short. To go on to that, having purpose-built technologies, I think is important, right? Recognizing that there's a variance in expertise, right? IT and OT are different. They're going to continue to be different. A lot of the times we talk about the skills gap, but sometimes I think that's misapplied because it's not necessarily a skills gap if you have the wrong expectation of the people that you have in the field, right? And so when you're selecting technologies that you expect to scale, making sure that they're usable by the individuals that you have in the place, even if it requires a little bit of upskilling, is important. It's the whole idea of you don't want to put a square peg in a round hole. If you have manufacturing engineers that's their profession, you're not going to necessarily want to drop the most complicated, sophisticated IT tools that requires 10 years of experience for them to be able to successfully interact with it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that like if I just think about manufacturing, I mean, there's kind of a long, history and documentation of the technical skills, not skills gap, the technical availability gap, meaning like in one of my old roles, we had a large team of engineers and technicians doing manufacturing work. It's just a very difficult labor market, right? And it's not going to get any better. So that means productivity. That means, to your point, enabling them with skills, with technology platforms to let them do their job more effectively. And when you tie it into cybersecurity now, it's like a subset of a very difficult talent pool, right? So one of the biggest, the biggest resource, the biggest challenge our customers face in OT cybersecurity, bar none, it's not close, is resourcing. People with subject matter expertise, companies committed to resourcing the requirements, not just tools, but people who actually understand both the production environment and the cybersecurity needs. The number one challenge.
And to actually build upon this, and I think this would go back to some of the things Tom referenced as best practices. The resource challenge is real, and there's a big topic of burnout within cybersecurity, and that's not exclusive to OT, right? That's across cybersecurity in all disciplines. But as organizations look to elevate their capabilities, a lot of times it leads to more tools to manage, more tools for them to maintain. And so that just exacerbates the problem. So doing things that Tom talked about, consolidating the number of instances of products that they have to manage. So instead of having consoles at each plant that someone has to manage, consolidating down to a few regional consoles, less infrastructure for them to manage. Integrating with ticketing systems, whether ServiceNow or otherwise. So you don't have to have somebody monitoring the console, checking console, assigning tickets, where all that can be automated. Streamlining those processes is going to lower the overhead, which is going to save your costs and also reduce the burden on your people.
And just to add to that, you'll have a more effective control suite. So if you can automate and really out of the box, it's easy to acquire technology and implement it out of the box, get it up and running fast. But if you focus on that integration and that process automation, creating data-driven processes, creating operational processes that actually are intuitive, don't require heavy SOPs. If you can get that piece right, that's the one thing that you can address at the implementation time, which will pay dividends, going forward. So 100% agree about the operational aspect of it.
All right, we've got a couple more minutes here. I wanted to go back to the kind of technology question. We've already alluded to the issue of having equipment on the floor that's, potentially 20 years or older, keeping that up to date. I wonder if there are some other technology challenges that you could highlight to our audience around the uptime issue.
I would lead with so I mentioned legacy, and it's all based in the manufacturing environment. But here's the other kind of the flip side of that: the technology available, and this gets back to your point, Ryan, about burnout or cyber fatigue. Right? Is the availability of tool sets and technologies is changing so fast, and the consolidation in the industry with vendors and things is happening so fast that it's really a challenge. That's a big challenge, is to keep up with it, right? So the commitment from a customer has to have a commitment to a long-term circular cycle of how they're going to manage their OT programs with respect to cybersecurity, right? And so I just think that the pace of change is not going to slow down. It's only going to speed up. And so building a organization that can manage through that, actually thrive under it, is sort of just foundational, I think.
Yeah, and building on that concept, because you said two things earlier that were interesting to me. So the opening poll, the most common answer in terms of what was causing downtime was hardware failure. That's going to happen when you've got gear that's 2024, right? And so that to me definitely illustrates the importance of weighing equally investment in kind of the reactive, the recovery capabilities, as opposed to just preventative measures, because there's some things that you're just not going to be able to prevent, whether it's cyber or otherwise. And then something else that you had referenced was, so air gapping is a tried and true kind of approach, especially when you've got this legacy end of life gear. You can't get rid of it because it's attached to something that's too expensive, but it's end of life. There's no patches. There's critical security vulnerabilities. Okay, let's air gap it. Well, you're dropping gear on the floor that has Ethernet cards. And if you plug that into your air gap network, suddenly it's not so air gapped anymore. And so maintaining visibility and control into that type of gear that's being introduced, that is I think a newer challenge that organizations are going to have to address, and kind of maintaining control of the different types of devices that are coming in, and making sure that doesn't lead to additional exposure within these legacy air-gapped environments is important.
Shannon, some closing thoughts here before we move on?
No, really good dialogue and discussion. I mean, I think that last discussion really highlights the challenge we all face, at least in the manufacturing space, which is you can air gap things, to your point, and you've got really legacy equipment. The number one issue the audience faces is unexpected, unplanned downtime around hardware, software. The only way to really prevent that is to get more data and to build programs around it, and to connect things. So it's this challenge with, if you want to improve your overall uptime, your mean time, between failures, you got to have data for analytics to predict when something's going to fail. Which is a real thing, and you could do it. And in order to do that, you got to suck the data out of everything. You got to connect everything, and now you got to secure it all. So it's a big challenge, and it's a matter of prioritization and funding, right, at the end of the day.
All right, gents, fantastic discussion, great insight. I think we've got to move on for now. Don't go far. We've got audience Q&A coming, and hopefully that'll give us a chance to discuss a little bit more of what we have going on here. Our next segment is a very brief tour of Acronis Cyber Protect, which is our platform that our manufacturing partners and customers use to protect OT and ICS computer uptime. Taking you on this very quick tour is our solutions architect, JD Perham. He's been with Acronis for 7 years, particularly focused on manufacturing environments. So over to you, JD.
Thanks, James. Hey, everyone. Today, we're going to run you through a new feature that's available in both Cyber Protect, in our cloud-hosted environment, as well as our on-premise, as long as you're on version 16. This feature is called one-click recovery. So building off of what everyone has been saying, this is one of the tools that we've developed to help bring critical systems back online in a very short manner. It all starts with an option inside of our protection plan. So I've loaded up a console here. I've got a machine. You'll notice it's offline because I've already got it prepped here. But if we look at the protection plan, I've got a standard backup plan associated with it here as part of this protection plan. So backing up, in this case, off to a network share and then out to our cloud storage. This new feature is hidden underneath our backup options. So if I open up our backup options here, we see our normal list, but if I come down a little bit, here's one-click recovery. What one-click recovery does is once I have it enabled here, and we do have some options to password protect it, is it modifies a feature that's available on the machine called the Acronis Startup Recovery Manager to have a pre-configured recovery script on it. So what that means is it's taking what we already have in that protection plan with those settings, the storage locations, the credentials to access those storage locations, and building out that protection plan, the recovery plan ahead of time. So that way you can quickly get a machine back up and running. Now, if you haven't played around with the Acronis Startup Recovery Manager before, if I kick out of this, and I'm going to actually cheat and kind of duplicate the tab here, the Startup Recovery Manager takes something that's already existing on your machine. Once we have an agent installed on the machine, we install a version of our bootable media. So that same rescue media that you use, when you create a CD or a USB stick. We include that with every single one of our agents, as that's how we do our restores from the consoles. If I was to select a machine here and click recovery, if we're redoing the entire machine, those files that are locally get loaded into RAM disk. That RAM disk is then pre-configured with that recovery task that we created here. You can check the status of the Startup Recovery Manager underneath details here. If I scroll down a little bit, we'll see in this case it's showing as grayed out because again the machine is offline, but you can see it's kind of turned on there in the background. Now, when we enable that protection plan, or when we enable one-click recovery, if we look at the activities on a given machine, so I'll grab a different machine here. If we look at the activities and we come down and find the backup for that specific machine, so in this case, here's our protection plan. When we look at the details, right, we'll see it say backing up the machine and then activating ASRM. That stands for the Acronis Startup Recovery Manager. That's us automatically turning that on every time the backup plan runs to confirm that it's there and running on the machine. That's us building out those scripts and getting it added to that media that exists on the machine. Part of the magic of a Startup Recovery Manager is we do modify this system. So when the system goes into post, you'll see a new prompt for F11. That F11 is configurable, so you can change that to a different key if you need. You can also change some of the text there. That's some options that we have in configuration files. But hitting F11 allows the product to load. Once the product is loaded, a user can then simply go through and say, hey, I need to recover this machine. Now, you may not want users doing that willy-nilly. That's where the password protection comes in. So if I was to come in and turn on the password here, that allows me to set a password here before they're able to initiate a restore using this tool. They would have to have that password. So if you wanted to lock it down a little bit, that way you could track what's happening with it. Hey, user calls in, needs the password, I can log that type of scenario. It is optional. We highlight it there, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave it off. As I mentioned, I've already got this enabled on this machine. I've got this machine right here. It's a virtual machine that we've booted. To save some time, I've gone ahead and hit that F11 prompt. So it does take a moment as the machine's going through post. You press F11, it loads our media in the background. But once it loads, this is the screen we're greeted with. So this shows me my 4 options here. I can recover the machine from the latest backup. I can choose which backup I want to recover. So that will list all of the recovery points that we have inside of the machine and say, hey, what point in time do you want to roll back to? I could say, let's perform a manual recovery of this machine via the console. So that loads it into that same bootable media console if you've used our product before that you're very familiar with. Or let's say someone got in here on accident. There's a reboot option that will just cause the machine to reboot. As a user, let's say, hey, I had a bad Windows update, or I needed to roll back part of change control, right? The patch didn't go as expected, and we need to go back to that last backup we took. Well, in that case, it's as simple as reboot the machine, press F11, wait till you get to this screen. It's as simple as choosing option 1 here. It's going to give you a warning saying, hey, this is a full disk recovery. It's going to roll everything back. Any changes after the selected backup will be lost. Do you want to continue? We'll go ahead and hit yes in this case. That's going to go ahead and start the product in the background. So it's kind of loading up the rest of the media in the background there. So we'll see it kind of flash. You'll see the media kind of pop up here in just a second, right? As the user, they don't have to do anything else at this point, though. It's kind of a hurry up and wait, right? So This is it loading the media in the background here. We'll see the normal Startup Recovery Manager window pop up here in just a moment, right, as it goes through and loads. So, this looks like our media. If you've used it before, you're used to seeing this. But again, didn't have to do anything. That script loads. Here it is loading or listing the backup files. This is it querying the storage, saying, hey, what backups are there? There you can see it picked the most recent one. And now we've got a recovery going. So realistically, I pressed F11. I hit enter a couple of times, and now I've got a restore going. At this point, we're going to see progress go across here. This can take, anywhere from a couple of minutes up to a half hour, depending on A, where your backup is stored at, or B, your performance, external variables that might be coming into play here. Now, this supports a wide variety of different storage locations. So the first one that we support is going to be what we call the Acronis Secure Zone. That's a hidden partition that gets saved onto the machine. You can utilize that if you've got the disk space there. The other option you could use, as I'm doing in this case, is I've got them all stored out onto a network share. This is just a simple SMB share coming from a NAS device we have in our lab. It also can support going out to our cloud. So if you're using the Acronis cloud storage, we can query that and be able to do those restores as well. So with that, you get 3 different storage options. You can layer them on top of each other. There is logic inside of here that if it can't find the local location to go on to the second one, again, it's building out this list of backups based off of what we have in our protection plan again, right? So if for some reason my NAS wasn't available here, it would then just automatically drop down into my cloud storage, query the cloud storage, find the recent backup, and pull it from there. Same kind of idea if I had my secure zone here instead, and then my network share is a secondary location. So this is available again in both our cloud hosted management as well as our on-premise version, as long as you're on version 16. This is very simple to turn on. If you've got your agent updated, it's as simple as turning on the backup option in your backup plans. You could even add this to existing backup plans as you see fit. We're not going to wait for this restore to finish, right? Because you can kind of see it's taking its time here. Don't be too worried about this time. It's about as accurate as Windows time, so it's going to adjust up and down. Normally, we see it jump up to this 2-hour mark. Then what will happen is when we get closer to that 15% mark, as it's redoing and pulling out all of that information, we'll see this drop down into the minutes type scenario. My lab's a little on the slow side, so it takes a little bit of time here. But I want to thank you for your time today. That was just a quick little snippet of one of the features that we have available in Acronis Cyber Protect. There's a wide variety of more. We're more than happy to walk you through, show you how Acronis can fit into your environment and help you protect those sensitive and critical infrastructure machines. But as always, I hope you have a great day, and thanks for your attendance. James, back over to you.
Thanks for that whirlwind tour, JD. Audience, understand I'm going to do a poll at the end to ask if you want to get more information from Acronis. One of your options is connecting with solutions architects like JD to give you a more in-depth tour of how we can help you out there. All right, I want to welcome my panelists back because it's time for audience live Q&A here. So if Tom, Shannon, Ryan, you can turn your cams and mics back on. We have one, it's more of a comment from an attendee than a question, but I think it's a useful jumping off point for a discussion. Attendee Steve says, we also need to be concerned with regulated industries and what is restored and properly documented. Yeah, and I know, like Tom, for instance, you've got a very strong risk and compliance background. You spent all that time with financial giants, but I imagine all of our panelists have some thoughts about how compliance figures into everything we've talked about today.
Right, and James, I think one of our assumptions that we talked about is probably a lot of people that represent manufacturing, so there may be a GMP yes, requirement at a lot of the companies. So that's where it's important not just to roll out the technology, but to roll out all the operational procedures and make sure that your SOPs, that you work with the right quality people. It's really all the project work. That's the hard part, right? Whereas the technical part, I mean, JD just went through some of the easier features, right? The technical part tends to be a little bit easier to address. The more boring, compliance oriented, you got to involve all the right stakeholders. It's really the project, wrapping it in the right project and doing all the right homework.
And And just to build on that, the rising regulatory environment, of course, is going to be really important for any company to monitor. There's real consequences associated with non-compliance in some cases. But I would also caution most companies around exclusively looking at the regulation to drive policy, because that can still leave you exposed, maybe not to the regulation, but to business disruption and business impact. And so while the regulatory environment can be a driver for investment, it should not be the sole compass for what the organizations are doing from a cyber resilience perspective. That should be a standalone assessment of the potential business impact of disruptions, and then solutions, workflows, investments are made to prevent or provide resilience against that.
All right, let's move on to another question here. I'm currently developing a webinar around the United Healthcare attack. I don't know if you've seen this in the news, but it's this healthcare conglomerate that had a massive ransomware outage a couple months ago. It took them weeks to recover because of their critical role in satisfying claims between providers, patients, pharmacies, and so forth, that had this disruptive effect across the whole U.S. healthcare system. So it's kind of an example in many ways of what to do wrong in preparing for a ransomware attack and what to do wrong in responding to it. And, United Health is looking at billions of dollars in cleanup and recovery costs here. I wonder if you guys could cite, if not from your direct experience, some incidents of similar kind of disasters, and what kind of lessons we can learn from the folks that have really done it wrong to the extent where they suffered very costly kind of widespread outages.
Well, the first one Tom, I'll just quickly touch on. The first one that comes to mind to me was Maersk with NotPetya, and that was in 2017. And I already touched on one of the concepts and that came out of that. And I forget the gentleman's name, but he was, I think, like the head of cyber incident response. And one of the things that he stated in a retrospective was it illustrated the need to have equal weighting on the recovery. There's so much focus and investment around the preventative measures, and regardless of the investment that you make, there's no way to say you're 100% certain to be protected and prevent all incidents. And to make sure that you have equal weighting, investment, and attention to the recovery procedures, tools, processes, human training, and knowledge, to make sure in that worst case you have the ability to recover, was critical. And that was the learning from Maersk, from their real world incident.
Yeah, I can piggyback on top of that, actually. I mean, this is public knowledge. Merck was also impacted by NotPetya, folks, right? So I think just a couple things. So we mentioned already your plans. So you're not going to have one plan that's actually going to get you into a good space. You're going to have to be able to string together a number of business continuity plans across sites, lacing them together with the appropriate recovery plans, the ability to kind of put all that together critically. So the whole planning process, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be as good as you want it, but really just practicing using all those plans and having a continuous improvement process around that. The other notion is, and we mentioned this before, layered controls, right? So you may have multiple recovery techniques. There may be recovery scenarios where you're going to recover an entire host, which covers multiple applications, versus we talked about just more surgical operational recovery. So there's going to be different scenarios. So you have to be prepared for kind of everything, from the smallest operational incidents up to a cyber event, right? And it's never going to be perfect. You have to practice, and you have to have, I'll go back to James's questions. You have to have the right people. It's probably the most important thing. You got to have the right people that can actually collaborate together.
Yeah, one of the things I've been gratified to see in recent months is updates to like cybersecurity frameworks like the NIST, CSF, and a lot of compliance regimens we've seen are doing this, as well as cyber insurers, which is placing more emphasis on that recovery capability. You know, in an age of AI enhanced cyber attacks, the likelihood that something is eventually going to get through is kind of trending upward. And I think this is why we're seeing this increased emphasis on the recovery side of the equation, you know, the right side of the framework being emphasized, both from a regulatory, from a framework, and from an insurance perspective, which kind of leads me into another question here, which is about how cyber insurance costs are going up. Standards for insurability are getting stricter. Coverage is shrinking. Any thoughts on the insurance issue, and maybe how the kind of processes and technology investments and people skilling measures you've talked about, how that might help there?
Well, I will just really quickly, I'll share one sort of scenario or use case that came up with one of our customers, which happened to be a bit in the power gen space, and another that was actually more institutional, like universities and campuses. But it was the impetus for the next step in terms of investment in tool sets. And it was when we talked to the customer about what's driving this from a business case perspective, it was like, we failed an audit and we need to do this or something like this to start to make actual real progress. So this is becoming a bigger issue, a real issue for our manufacturing customers for sure. The insurability and that issue.
Any last thoughts here? I think we're close to the top of the hour. I'm afraid I've got to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean,
I think we could. Go ahead, Tom.
Just we haven't really mentioned just overall resilience. So I think Ryan kind of hit the nail on the head. Recovery has kind of been an afterthought, right, from a cyber agenda perspective. But overall resilience, you got to balance the preventative and the recovery, and you also, again, we're talking about OT, the uptime. So making sure that the services don't fall over, that's equally important, right? So from both a preventative and a corrective perspective.
I think Tom hit the nail on the head, and Shannon, from the insurance perspective, touched on it. It's these solutions and for the problems are a prerequisite to get insured, and a lot of businesses need the insurance today. So it's important, not just to make the investments, but to develop the plan and the strategy ahead of time, so that the investments are made strategically and are coherent to protect.
All right, gents, I wish we had a lot more time to continue this discussion, but we do have to let our attendees go. I want to say thanks so much to our speakers, Tom Fertal of Merck, Shannon McKay of Rockwell Automation, and my Acronis colleagues, Ryan Davis, JD Perham, and also a shout out to solutions engineer Josh Bryant, who's been helping us backstage with your questions. All right, it's time to do a very quick wrap up here. Let me review some additional resources for you here. The Acronis Resource Center has hundreds of collateral pieces, white papers, ebooks, case studies, other things that you can download for free. So please visit that. I'm just going to highlight a few here. Case studies of Acronis partners and customers in manufacturing: Tata Steel, ABB, Toyota, BDR, Pharma, all some interesting case studies, many of which are speaking specifically to the topic of uptime and resilience that we addressed today. The last word here is, if you got the means and inclination, you may have seen our video before the event started about the Acronis Cyber Foundation and how it builds schools and provides technical training to kids in need around the world. If you got the means and inclination, please support that nonprofit effort of Acronis. With that, I'll say thanks everybody for your time today. We hope to see you at another event in the near future. So long for now.